So if I can invite everybody to kind of settle in, we're going to begin in a minute. I have a couple new pieces of information. I'm actually going to share with you some left brain stuff, so could you be cognitive with me just for a second here? And as a matter of fact, I have to read it because it's all about locations of breakouts after this session, okay? Believe it or not, the world has changed while you were enjoying your lunch. Nothing stays the same. This is how it is these days. So here you go. Anybody who has signed up for the yoga breakout is in 2E. Wow, I feel like I'm on a plane. And your connecting flight will be. And the Freako system, which is Amit's breakout, and Amit, you'll want to know this because this is a change for you, baby bear. 2C. The locavore breakout, 2B. Oh, okay, I'm waiting. Yep. Sorry, talking too fast. I should talk slowly. Okay, so here we go. Locavore. Actually, it sounds way better slow, don't you think? Locavore, 2B. Got it? Here comes the next one. The herbs is at the ledges. Don't ask me, I have no idea what that means. But good man. It is on the first floor of the Marlborough Graduate Center. And then the film, Food for Change, is located right here. You actually don't even have to shuffle your little behind. You can stay right where you are. And then the other thing that I'm telling you is collaborative investment is located Latches 4, which is one of the movie theaters. You got that? Latches 4. That's like here in this building, but go out and look at numbers, and it's the one that goes like that. Out in the lobby, just before the doors. Okay, great. And my friend Kevin, we had a thing. You know, guys, it's slow living. Do I have to do my theater thing and tell you guys to turn off your cell phones? Apparently I do. I know. We had one go off. I know, and whoever you are, I know you're humiliated right now and you're hiding under your chair. So I'm not even going to look out into the space to see what face is feeling that. So turn off your cell phones. Love you for that. Because next time I might have to leap out and do something about it. So here we are. Oh my goodness, this is going to be amazing. You guys, this is an amazing plenary. It has been my enormous pleasure to become friends with Amit Sharma. And I'm so proud of my matchmaking skills because I put Amit with somebody you would never expect. I matchmaked a little Amit and Amy Johnquest relationship, and it is golden. So let me tell you about both of them. I'm going to read some stuff, and I'll probably riff some stuff too. So now, first I'll read Amit Sharma's biography. Amit has worked for organizations at the highest level of the corporate, financial, government, and development sectors. I know, sounds like he's the man, but wait. Throughout his career, he has focused on the intersection of commercial enterprise, public policy, in particular international security, and the capital markets, with a particular view toward the risks that intersect these sectors and the nature in which individuals and institutions alike invest to build resilient businesses, communities, and achieve, I'm throwing out some air quotes here, wealth, because you'll see that there's a lot more to wealth than you might have previously thought before coming to the Latches Theater today. Amit's career has included time in the U.S. Treasury, first at the inception of the department's Office for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, and later as a senior advisor and chief of staff to the Deputy Secretary. He has also worked and served as the chief of staff and head of project management and strategy for Mitsubishi UFJ Securities, the broker-dealer and investment arm of the Bank of Tokyo. Amit has led initiatives and/or held a variety of consulting roles related to international security and risk, financial integrity issues, including anti-corruption and asset recovery, associated with kleptocratic states. I have to tell you, that's the first time I ever heard the word kleptocratic states, but man, we can think about that, right? And international development. He was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Mongolia. and he is currently incubating a potential investment vehicle to facilitate the growth and support of a scalable income generative enterprise focused on the global poor, as well as an interdisciplinary international risk advisory platform. And Amit is our own. He lives in Guilford, Vermont, with his gorgeous, brand new, spankin' clean baby who kept him up all night long. So you're gonna love him through this. Sorrel, I held him. Perfect baby, except at 3 in the morning. And so that's our Amit. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my dear girlfriend of over 20 years, Amy Johnquest. Amy Johnquest is known as the Banner Queen, and she has done art on a worldwide and local level. As a matter of fact, anybody in Western Massachusetts has seen her art everywhere, particularly in Northampton, where she's lived a great portion of her life. But she's also done work, commissioned work for Bruce Springsteen, come on, Disney Magazine, and Applegate Farms, if you guys know the cold cuts, like best smoked turkeys, Applegate Farms, and lots of others. She's been involved locally with many art-based projects, including, I love this one, a project that I commissioned with her in mind, which was a full-scale opera about the life of Sojourner Truth. And Amy Johnquest created all of the scenic art, dozens and dozens of paintings that provided the scenic backdrop for my opera, which we have taken all over. And it was very beautiful. Amy's work is exquisite. And she's also done site-specific installations for MIFA's Victory Theater, as well as the Paper City Studio themed exhibitions and Open Square's Arts of the Valley in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She's also the artistic director of the Tabor Art Gallery at Holyoke Community College. And I want you to know that Amy, with love in her heart, has created 17 paintings illustrating in her wonderful, whimsical, intelligent, language-turning style that you'll be seeing in Amit's presentation. And I want you to know that you can have them for practically nothing. So when you see something that you're in love with up here on this screen, which probably will be 17 different moments, all of those paintings are located over at the River Garden, and you can go buy them over there. And if you are thinking about what you've just seen and you want to sort of mull in your mind here in this building, I can tell you that there's a setup that Amy put out just on the other side of the exit door, which is all of the paintings just in a color copy fashion. So you can look at them. They're all numbered. Whatever you fall in love with, just remember that number from 1 to 17. Walk over to the River Garden and make it yours. You know you want to. So great. I'm going to step away and let Amit do his thing. May we welcome to this beautiful, crazy stage filled with naked Greek goddesses from 1973. Welcome, Amit Sharma.
That's a heck of an intro. Let me be very clear by brand spanking clean. That is just not correct at 3 in the morning. This dialogue is going to be an interesting one because, quite frankly, I want to reverse the description that Linda gave. I'm going to try and put some stories, some anecdotes, and some lessons and observations that I've learned along my way to some pretty cool message boards, some pretty cool stories behind me. And so let's flip it. Right? I'm talking a little bit about some concepts that, like I said, have just been born out of observations of experience of mine over time. How many of you have heard of the Center for Inclusive Capitalism? It's interesting, right? It might be an oxymoron for some, right? Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, last week in London, they put together a conference on inclusive capitalism, and His Royal Highness Prince Charles was there, and the Rothschilds were sponsoring it. The City of London was sponsoring it. Mr. Carney of the Bank of England, Bill Clinton, our former president, was there. And the managing director came up and she was asked to talk about this concept of inclusive capitalism. And so she started out by saying, well, the root of the word capital comes from Latin, caput, cattle heads. It's what folks counted to understand someone's wealth, right? The first time the word capitalism was used was the author William Thackeray in 1854 to talk about the use of funds. It really wasn't until the 19th century where the consecration of capitalism started. Folks like Marx and others that talked about, well, maybe capitalism has the seeds of its own destruction, where it's not consumption, but profiteering, the accumulation of wealth, and in fact, the accumulation of capital, and in fact, if that capital was concentrated in the few, it could lead to massive cyclicality, it could lead to destruction, societal destruction and unrest, social unrest. So Ms. Lagarde said, well, is the concept of inclusive capitalism the answer to Marx's highlighting this potential threat of this concept of capitalism? Because what we've seen in the last, certainly in the last 5 years, if not the last 10 or 15, I would argue, is really a period of unbelievable excess. Excess in risk-taking, excess in opacity, excess in complexity, the concentration of wealth, the excess of wealth creation in purely economic terms. And there's been one fundamental reality that we've seen in that context, and that's the breakdown of trust. Ultimately, trust is what holds markets together. It's really the underlying transactive value, the interaction between people. Trust. Interestingly, how the word credit, actually the Latin, comes from the Latin word root trust. Well, what is a credit default swap then? Ask yourself. So it's interesting when we think about what this concept of inclusive capital is and what we might learn. Well, who the heck am I to sort of give you some ideas on what this whole construct might be? I've had the good fortune, some would say curse, of sort of spending some time in government, on the regulatory side, spending some time in the institutional finance and banking side in New York and in Asia, spending some time in core grassroots development in Peace Corps and in South America and South Asia, and spending some time in commercial enterprise. And there's a really interesting set of themes that I've seen, three in particular. One, that risk and the understanding of risk is pretty varied through all those players, right? They all see risk differently, and yet they all need to collaborate and cohabitate to sort of come up with solutions to address risk. So, to borrow a phrase from a firm I'm working with now, shared risks required shared solutions. Second is return. What is this concept of returns? Returns to a development activist in Botswana is wholly different than returns to a portfolio manager at a bank. Wholly different to returns to a State Department official negotiating a bilateral treaty with a foreign counterparty. The idea of returns is also equally as diverse. So risk is diverse, returns are diverse, defined wholly differently by different parties. And so the third interesting theme or observation I've seen is that it's only through this intersection between all these different players, public, private, commercial, financial, development, regulatory, that we might find an understanding that's a little bit more holistic and develop an investment strategy, and we'll get to what I think, humbly, investment might mean in this construct. And then in that context, we might then start thinking about what this real root wealth really means. What is wealth? Well, we're living in a pretty unprecedented time, and I know that sounds like an amazing cliche, but it's one of those great cliches because it happens to be so true, right? In a post-9/11 context where everything got whipsawed into the international security space and we were fighting foreign wars and domestic wars, and security became the end of the day, and it was no longer you had to show up at an airport 30 minutes before your flight, but show 2 hours and strip down so everyone could make sure that you weren't carrying a bomb in your underwear, God forbid. I highly recommend don't carry bombs in your underwear. It's just not the most efficient mode of transport. And then exacerbated in 2008, where this sort of excess got to such unbelievably pronounced levels. And for a time, if you recalled, in the fall of 2008, when the world was falling apart, when buildings were literally falling over in Manhattan, there was this funny time where there was a reset. Everyone hit Control-Alt-Delete. Everyone started saving a little bit more. Companies started saying, let's think about how we treat our workers. Governments and regulators started saying, we need to catch up to this financial innovation gone amok. But then very quickly, we forgot. And the same proponents who said, save more, take less risk, were saying, you know what? To stimulate this economy, spend more. Spend more, take more risk, right? And these are colleagues of mine stepping up in front of Congress and saying, well, we're trying to encourage banks to take more risk. Well, they just took all the risk in the world, and look at all of the excesses that led to the kind of crash that we saw. So the pendulum swung way the other way, and governments had, 350 different provisions and legal codes around Dodd-Frank and other rules regarding risk-taking. You had international banks and commercial enterprises scaling up compliance programs and legal programs. You had unbelievable a shift in this momentum, and yet we were still facing this stagnant. We are continuing to face the stagnant stagnant economic growth, income disparity, the widening gap. I think it was in 1929, on the cusp of the Great Depression, the variability in income between the top and bottom half was 22, 23. Now it's north of 40. North of 40. So it's very interesting, and this isn't limited to just economic markets, right? The exacerbating climate change, the UN just came out with their report. Half of that report said, maybe we've gone a little bit too far, we don't know, right? We've got unbelievable societal unrest. Wars are taking years, not just months. So what is this that we need to sort of recalibrate? And we continue to rely on these funny old assumptions for figuring out how to get out of this conundrum we're in. And I would posit that we've got some pretty interesting examples that if we were just to step back and look at the organic nature of ecosystems and societies and communities, we might find some parallels and some lessons to inform us. Well, the economic marketplace, right, is that funny place, and I would argue anywhere, where you buy, you sell, you borrow, you lend. But one thing everyone has in common, right? Producers, consumers, governments, commercial enterprise, banks, buyers, sellers. Every one of us here in this room is an investor. Everyone has something to invest. Everyone is constantly investing something and expecting some return. That's what we do. That's what everyone in a marketplace does. They invest. Then you have to ask yourself the question, what are we investing, and how are we defining wealth, or the object of wealth, to live our lives, right? And there's three founding principles, I think, that we can take from natural ecosystems, communities, and the markets that I think are worth noting. One is this concept of equilibrium, right? And in economics, it's price discovery at the balance of supply and demand, right? Well, isn't that like natural ecosystems, looking at the balance of predator-prey relationships? What about stability? We're all trying to achieve stability in the face of volatility. So we diversify risk to achieve that stability. Well, what is biodiversity, if not trying to achieve stability in natural ecosystems? And the last is longevity, sustainability, right? We're trying to be going concerns as companies, as individuals, as communities, as natural habitats. And I think these three fundamental principles may give us a guiding set of characteristics that if investigated thoroughly, we might think about investment and wealth in a more holistic way. And start learning from those, our most natural architects. The beaver. The beaver, my elder son, 6 years old, tells me is the largest rodent in the world. And it happens to be one of the best architects on the planet. So you start thinking about how can you start rebuilding our societies, understanding this. And if we look at natural ecosystems and communities and then step back and say, how do I understand my economic marketplace? We can then start thinking, how is the system organized? What are its priorities? What are the goals and objectives of ecosystems? Can I bring that into my sort of investment strategy? How do they deal with uncertainty, risk, volatility? How do ecosystems and communities live within finite and constraints and limitations? All of these, if put together, we might start thinking about this in an interesting way. Now, and there's a lot of work that's been done already. The pioneers like Donella Meadows, up in northern Vermont a long while ago, started talking about the triple bottom line. The Brundtland Commission, WF, the World Economic Forum, others have talked about this sociological, ecological economics and tried to put this all together in some construct. And that construct so that we can understand if we feed X, Y, and Z, are we not having detrimental or positive impacts in other areas? And so this dialogue came along, and I was talking to Amy and thought, well, there's some interesting parallels here, right? One, ecosystems, societies, and markets all operate in these strangely chaotic environments. Two, that there are always two sides to every trade. Predator, prey, consumption, production, supply, demand, buy, sell, borrow, lend, input, output. And then there's some funny synergy between that. How do I take factors of production and make goods and services? How do I take human capital and translate that into benefits for society? How do I look at the ecosystem and take the benefits but also have some regenerative capacity to it? So I said, how can we come up with some graphic that looks like this? And Amy's genius came up with this wonderful thing, right? The regenerative, self-reinforcing, mutually beneficial cycle that underlies free enterprise, free communities, free societies, free markets, the Freako system. You were all wondering where that came from. The Freako system. So that's sort of, when I started thinking about this way back in graduate school, more academically, I started trying to think about how can we depict and talk about the system and learn from the organic nature of societies and ecosystems to start implementing a more holistic view of wealth and investment strategy. So what are the objectives? What are the priorities of ecosystems and societies and markets? Well, in the markets, we talk about things like equity, growth, productivity, capital preservation. Sociologists talk about empowerment, mobility and opportunity, identity preservation. Ecologists talk about regenerative and carrying capacity, right? These are the ultimate objectives of this. And a number of things have been written. Anyone has read Lester Brown's seminal work, Ecoeconomy, where he likened fisheries to endowments. And we draw down endowment, pays income in perpetuity until the asset base of that endowment gets drawn down to zero and your income goes to zero. Well, that's not unlike the great spaceship Earth, right? If we keep drawing and keep drawing and keep drawing on human and natural capital stores, our income goes to zero. So where are we really applying those concepts of wealth and return, and where are we investing to ensure that capital store remains high, in fact is regenerative and growing in a way that we can in fact reap the benefits and get those returns in perpetuity. These are some of the ideas, and you see them all over the place. Look at countries, North Korea. Per capita basis, North Korea has the largest standing army on the planet, and they finance that army through a whole host of criminal enterprises and exploitation of its people. So not only do we have a Korean peninsula that is still nuclear, we also have one of the largest humanitarian crises on the planet that is very rarely talked about. Well, on the other hand, you have Denmark, which through a series of fiscal systems and rules really underlie early education and healthcare, understanding the societal benefits of productivity. Now, I'll ask you, on the Global Happiness Index, which one's higher, North Korea or Denmark? And which one's more sustainable, the longevity concept? right? So it's interesting because we see these in so many different places, and economics can learn from this, right? You know, take the cyclical natures of layoffs, hiring and firing. One externalizes the cost, one internalizes the cost. When you lay off and fire en masse, you are putting the burden on others for productive value. But retraining increases the asset base of your people. It internalizes that cost. And we have to operate all within some sort of construct, this space of limitations, these guideposts, right? We live in a space of finite resources, right? Natural capital, economic capital, you know, the depth of our pockets. And societal capital, human capital. And if we push those limits and constraints too hard, that's when we start creating bubbles and they burst. And so economics understands this idea of scarcity and opportunity cost because that's what they say goes into the price of a good. But really, when you bought your Ford F-150 or your Prius or that book off the shelf or your Nike tennis shoe, was the entire factor of production put into the price of that good? What about the price of clean air and water? What about the extractive value of fossil fuels and the regenerative capacity? Is that all priced into that good or in that service? Think about where your investment dollars are going when you buy those goods. Think about the price of foreign and domestic conflict, crime, drug abuse, mental health and addiction. These are all real costs, real constraints to society. And yet, do we really factor all these in when we think about a holistic investment strategy? I'm not sure. And so when I think about and I sort of observe from a government perspective, a commercial enterprise perspective, a market perspective of the last 10 years, the last 15 years of this unbelievable excess, are the solutions we're bringing the most productive in that space? Or are they creating even more excesses? Are we being efficient and productive? And this concept of efficiency is hysterical to me because, you know, economics talks about it all the time. We have to be more efficient. More efficient, greater productivity. Well, you know, economists love to talk about, you know, if I get better or more net benefit than the cost of allocating that resource, efficiency. Well, fantastic. Think about that next time you go shop for the cheapest good in town. Because if it came from a company that exploited child labor in a far off away land that you don't know, you got a real cheap good there. But what is the net cost to society that you've contributed with your economic asset, your dollar? So it's very interesting, this idea of efficiency, because the cost of remediation, the cost of cleanup, ends up not being factored into the upfront. But you know, the great part of this is we get to all call it productivity in the economics world. All right, let me give you some statistics. Hurricane remediation is a $14 billion business. And by 2030, they're expecting it to be about a $24 billion business. Business, right? The cost of remediation, forget the lives lost, the displacement, the loss of culture and historical integrity. $14 billion of that remediation gets showcased as growth. Is that net benefit or net cost, right? Just a couple weeks ago, former Secretary of the Treasury, Tim Geithner, came out with a book talking about the bailout. And interestingly, right down the road here, Ms. Warren also talked about what she thought in her assessment, in her calculus, in her mathematics, was what we did through that time period of net benefit or net cost to society. And then, was it the most efficient investment? And this happens everywhere, not just in terms of the net cost to your pocketbook, but the net cost to your time. Are we being efficient? You know, we're working hundreds of hours more. Americans work hundreds of hours more today than they did 20 years ago. And ask yourself, have we seen 100 times efficiency? I hate this thing. Because it's made me work hundreds of hours more, and it's led to sleepless nights, it's led to more days on the road, away from family, Have I been really efficient and productive with my time? Have I invested wisely to reap the net benefit, the return, in terms of my understanding of a wealth objective? But that means, I have to price the risk and return, right? And this is the crux. Risk. How do we price risk? How do we price and understand the risks and the challenges we face? Because that really is the first half of figuring out your investment thesis. And I don't know that we've got that right? Ultimately, society's ecosystem, we work in this sort of chaotic environment, and yet, do we really understand how those hundreds of thousands of variables, are they leading to stability or not? There's two underlying premises and characteristics between ecosystems, societies, and markets that I find interesting with respect to risk. And one is diversification. We talked about it earlier, right? Biodiversity, socioeconomic, cultural diversity leads to stability in societies and in natural ecosystems. Well, so is portfolio diversification. A healthy investment advisor will tell you, don't put all your eggs in one basket, spread the risk. And the other one is hedging. Well, hedging is very interesting. Have you heard this? This is one of the most fascinating stories I've ever read. The orpandola bird, the cowbird, the botfly, and the wasp. This is one of the most incredible models, I think, that should inform everyone's investment strategy. So, the orpandola bird hatches these young that don't have a protective coat. So they're real susceptible to these botflies, these invasive botflies. And the big cowbird, the mama cowbird, throws these eggs into the orpandola nest, saying, I get some free childcare. And the orpandola bird has to then say, do I keep this egg in my nest, much larger, and sometimes leading to death of her own young, or do I leave them in there? Well, what's interesting, the population of the botfly determines this. And these cowbirds, they preen these little orpandola birds, and they keep them alive, unless wasps and bees are prevalent in that particular community. And if there are, those wasps and bees, they just devour these botflies, populations go down, and so Miss Orpandola, free child care worker, says, get out of my nest. So she's hedging. In communities where the population of the botfly is lower because the population of the wasp or bee is higher, she doesn't need that cowbird, and she permits it when those populations are in reverse. This concept of hedging is all over. Maybe we can take from this and think about how we look at risk and uncertainty when we think about our own investment portfolios and therefore our activities. But this is where maybe the argument breaks down, because economics and markets have fricasseed, that's a technical term, have fricasseed this concept of risk. In markets, economists talk about risk as volatility, any deviation from the norm, positive or negative. And the other funny thing about economic risk is you make no money unless you take risk. Perfectly hedged strategies make no money. You have to take risk in order to make economic wealth in the modern sort of capital markets. So when I said those earlier statistics of hurricanes and floods and these natural disasters, on the flip side, there's insurance. We can buy protection, and what a fantastic growth industry. We can hedge against that risk. Have you all heard about these catastrophic bonds at the $20 billion market? Any investment advisors out there, man, with the amount of liquidity that's out there, go buy. I really don't mean that, by the way. It will grow by 150% in the next 4 years, they say. And I'm going to read you an interesting quote. This is one of the best quotes I think I've seen, and this is just 2 days ago. Check this out. He or she shall not be named, but a prominent analyst on the street said, and I quote, "The appetite for such bonds illustrates that investors should expect more complex, esoteric, and opaque structured finance deals than ever. While these deals will likely eventually contribute to a financial disaster, that event is not likely to happen in the near term, because the nation's pensions and other large investors have fresh cash pouring into the system, and they're seeking high yield." Well, yeehaw. Let's do it all over again. Have we not understood the lessons just 5 years ago? But he's right, this analyst. There's unbelievable liquidity in the capital markets. Not on Main Street, but in the capital markets. So people are looking for some kind of return. And you have to ask yourself as an investor, is that the kind of return that we're seeking? I'd argue no. But this understanding of engagement, resilience, and holistic investment, I think, is where we come out here. And so you might ask, well, Anna, that's nice. A nice little description there. What the heck does that have to do with us? Well, maybe the answer to that question is in the flaw in my argument. Because the flaw in my argument is all of us, humans. Humans are not very smart. Humans don't remember. But humans are also very innovative. And they find ways to enhance their space given the assumptions, biases they have. Humans create value propositions. Humans have value that they bring to the marketplace. And all the market is a place that, in an aggregate way, assigns a price. It doesn't determine ethics. It doesn't determine morals. It assigns a price. And this is where so many start to walk away and forget that that marketplace is not where you can assign value, it's only where you can assign price. And so when we think about our investment strategy, are we valuing those things and then driving resources to places that mean most? There are two underlying assumptions of economics, modern economic theory, that I think are pretty questionable these days. But this is going back to the Adam Smith days, that philosopher, that economic philosopher. One is this concept of the rational being, right? Given a set of circumstances, what would the rational person do? And the other one is free markets, a world of perfect information. If we have perfect information, we all make those right decisions. Well, someone tell me if they've ever met a rational being, and someone tell me where the free market is. Because in my lifetime, I've not seen it either. Well, my wife's a very rational being. Well, let's just put that. And I know I'm on TV, so I want to make sure that everyone understands my wife is a very, very rational being, although quite irrational if she decided to marry me. How many of you know the behavioral economist Daniel Ariely? Fascinating. He wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. What an amazing guy. He's a PhD, works at Duke. He does some classes at MIT as well. And he did a whole series of experiments to test people's rational or irrational thought, thinking of, are people likely to cheat or not cheat given certain circumstances? One experiment he did was he went through all these dorms, and in their refrigerators he put a 6-pack of Coke. In another slew of dorms, he put a plate of $6 bills, and he tested how long before those dollar bills or those Cokes would disappear. Well, lo and behold, in 2-3 weeks' time, dollar bills stayed there, the Coke's gone. Why? So, it's interesting. He did a whole series of other experiments where, he gave people incentive to do a test. Marcus Many Wright self-proclaim the right or wrong answers, and then get either cash or tokens. He did two different tests. He did a third experiment, the same set of circumstances, but before you took the test, you had to sign an honor code. And then the other half didn't sign the honor code. He found those that signed the honor code, even a fake one, had less propensity to cheat than those that didn't sign the honor code. Right? Those that were given incentive to get tokens, even if they just had to walk across the room to get that cash, had a higher propensity to cheat than those that were just given cash directly. These are some very interesting findings, right? And so you can boil them down to sort of 4 or 5 different key truths. One is, he would say that everyone is capable of cheating, at least to say that everyone is willing to cheat given certain circumstances, at least just a little. Number 2, the more distance you put between sort of economic value and something else, the Coke example, for example, people are more willing to cheat the greater distance between sort of cash and what that might represent. Third, groupthink. In certain circumstances where someone from another school stands up and says, I've done all the right answers, give me my money, that may make it okay for those people to say, I'm affiliated with that group. It's okay to cheat, not okay to cheat. And the other one is signing the honor code or not signing the honor code. When we're reminded of our morality, we're less likely to cheat. Well, let's think about the last 10, 15 years in the markets. We're getting farther and farther and farther and farther away from where we go deliver cash and get value. Now think about mortgage-backed securities. Think about financial derivatives and what they really represent, an aggregation of some person in some faraway place who has a probability to default on their debt or not. I don't know that person. I'm willing to buy this derivative product, right? And if the groups that were incentivized to sell more predatory lending, then they start seeing things in distortion. So those incentives go a long way. What about that whole idea of signing the honor code? What happened to our social contract? That understanding of community value, community partnership. Maybe we need to remind ourselves in a really holistic way what that social contract is. But, like I said, we're seeing financial crises that were, really just country by country specific, global in nature. We're seeing conflicts that were months, 2, 3, 4 months at a time, lasting years and are regional. We're seeing income disparities, people taking the street, broader North Africa in the Arab Spring, overturning governments. Thailand in the 19th coup, just in the last couple of weeks. So we're seeing this just exacerbated impact, and maybe the pendulum has gone so far, we're just not coming back. That's my talk, guys. Go figure it out. Actually, I'm pretty hopeful. I'm pretty hopeful because there's some pretty interesting momentum out there that I think if we grab a hold of and start moving in a pretty concerted communal way, we might do some pretty good work. The idea of the triple bottom line is getting taken hold of by more and more companies. The concept of patient capital, investing for the long term, conscious capital, folks trying to put their economic resources to work in places that mean well for the environment, well for society, well for governance. The whole impact investing community is growing leaps and bounds. And the biggest issues there, right, are really how do we measure return? And the 2 seconds I'd put on metrics are important. Metrics are important because they help us regulate, they help us manage, they help us check. Are we getting the kinds of returns in the manner we wish, commensurate with our risk? But price is relative, right? Value is relative. So maybe we need a construct, a new framework that doesn't deal in trade-offs, doesn't deal in hedging only, doesn't deal in you can either do well or do good, you can't do the same. We need something that is not overly complex. We need something that speaks to all investor types, the financial purist that just wants to go make the money, and the philanthropist that really just wants to do good in the world with their economic assets. And so I think that this new framework allows us to have our Havana and smoke it too. That's the idea. And I think this new framework, if we harness it and take advantage of it in a concerted way, excuse me, I'm losing my space here, speaks two things, right? One is this concept of engagement. What are we doing with each other individually and in our communities that reinforce our wealth objective individually and collectively? And what are we doing from the standpoint of setting up resilience for ourselves and our community in a way that builds the kind of returns that we seek, the higher yields, the higher dividends that we seek? So simplicity, values-driven wealth, simplistic and non-complex investment theory. This is the basis for, I think, a sound investment philosophy, because the underlying truth remains every investor is looking for higher return. Everyone. Everyone is looking for a higher amount of wealth, kind of wealth. And how do we define it? So let's take some traditional words and redefine them. Wealth, economically defined, has been quantitative economic value. I posit that wealth is not just money, it's knowledge, it's relationships, it's time, it's expertise. What are you all doing to enhance and grow your wealth objective? If I think about this very personally, does the investment in my garden atop the Bullock Hill in Guilford bring me and my family enhanced welfare, nutritious food, grown organically with our own hands? That's wealth to me. And I'd rather do that and put my investment there than go to Costco. Right? Think about wealth in those terms. Where am I putting my economic and other assets to generate return for me? Risks, traditionally in economic terms, was volatility, deviation from the norm, but really it's any uncertainty, any challenge that we face as a company, as an individual, as a family, as a community, to grow our wealth objective and to service our markets. So I think about myself again. If it has not been made apparent to you, I'm not a white person. I'm an Indian. Come from a long heritage of very proud Indians. And I decided to settle my family, I'm going to say this on TV, in the whitest state in the Union. And that state has embraced me and my family. But I have to ask myself, I'm taking a risk. Do I get a disruption in my cultural and historical heritage, in that which I can confer to my children when the net benefits are coming to me in other ways? It's a risk I take. It's a risk our family takes. But it's a calculated risk where I believe the returns are commensurate with that risk. Markets, who do we serve? Every place is a marketplace. This is a marketplace. You all are buying something I'm selling you. I'm selling you a set of ideas, and you can either choose to buy them or not. But there's two sides to every coin. You all are selling me something too, your confidence. And I'm either buying it or not. Every place is a marketplace. Every market has interaction. And so you have to ask yourself, by coming to this conference, coming to this summit, are you getting the kind of returns by engaging with these participants in a meaningful way? Look to your right and left. Maybe the person to your left has a technology that can bring your product to a new market. Maybe the person to your right has a new skill that can train your workforce. There are things that you can do to leverage each other in this marketplace to generate your wealth objective. So invest wisely in that 3 days that you're here. Assets, traditionally, tangible and intangibles, perceived future value, right? I would argue it's everything: relationships, knowledge, time, expertise, economics, to achieve that wealth objective. What are you doing to get that wealth objective? And the final is leverage, and leverage has gotten a really bad word, but leverage really is just that. 2 times 2 equals 5 or more. It's the how in every investment strategy. How are you investing your time? How are you leveraging your relationships to deliver new markets? How are you investing your expertise to build community wealth in a way that engages you in that community and also builds a set of resilience for you to take and have returns in a meaningful way? And there's examples of this all around. You know, I think of Mary Ellen Franklin, who lives just down the road on Weatherhead Hollow, and a couple years ago I asked her, well, what's wealth to you? And she said, you know, my son is just graduating from the University of Vermont, and he's decided to come and rejoin the family farm, and this farm will be around for the next 30 years. This is a 7th or 8th generation family farmer whose wealth now in the sustainable organic family farm will continue. That's incredible wealth. You might think that her investment in her son's education is reaping above market return. In Colorado, a financial advisor friend of mine has teamed up with local inner city schools and is delivering financial literacy training for free to inner city school high schoolers, getting them into college, and then he re-employs them in the market in Colorado. You might think that his investment of his time and expertise into those inner city programs bring back to him above market returns. And another buddy of mine, a bazillionaire in Manhattan who traded in the markets, unbelievable philanthropist, built an unbelievable cadre of managerial tools, and he began working for the Beckett Fund, which is an organization in Washington that works on religious freedom. And anyone who's persecuted in terms of their religious freedom and their First Amendment rights, he goes to try and help. Now, this is a devout Catholic. For him, returns are to get into the kingdom of heaven. Now, however you call it, his return objective, his wealth objective, he's leveraging his assets, his time, his money, his expertise to achieve some wealth objective. So these are interesting stories. And the story of community wealth, I think, it should be told more and more and more in a macro way. These are individual examples. Here's some macro examples. Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, the school system there, saw the writing on the wall a number of years ago before Detroit had to declare bankruptcy. And this is a public school system that saw their funding cut. And what gets cut? The arts, music. And they said, this is way too important. Bloomfield Hills, it turns out, is a pretty diverse cultural community. And so what do? They went to all the car companies and they started giving cultural training. And by doing that, they were able to gain some income and, without public and municipal help, reintroduce some of those programs that they were losing. Share Our Strength is an organization I had the very great privilege to work with out of Washington, D.C., an organization birthed out of the resurgence of the global famine and poverty context in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And they said, well, how do we get people around hunger and poverty? Well, who finds it important, this issue of hunger? Well, let's go to all the restaurateurs and chefs around the country and recruit them to dedicate one day where they make their wares and bring folks in, and a portion of those tickets will go to local food shelters. Well, here's what's interesting. After doing it for 6 months, they assembled this unbelievable asset. That asset was this network of chefs and restaurateurs. And so who called them? Cal Fallon, Williams-Sonoma, Illy Cafe, Avion, and said, I will give you hundreds of thousands of dollars just to have access to that asset. They leveraged it up in a way that 100% of every ticket sold goes to hunger and poverty programs in those communities that they serve. And I had the great privilege to work with them because they said, let's assemble a brand new asset, so let's do it around university and professional sports. So we went to DC United and the Baltimore Ravens and Georgetown, and we said, guys, come do a sports day for kids. Well, who wants access to those assets? Sprint, Alltel, Gatorade, Nike, Adidas. Similar results. So this idea, this concept of community wealth is everywhere. This concept of community wealth is right here with the strolling of the heifers. And since February, we sat down with Orly and a group of volunteers saying, what is it that you all are doing to achieve that strategic mission? And what is your concept of wealth? And this is a remarkable organization that is trying to pair food and agricultural systems with education and training with local businesses and achieve some wealth objective for the community. So that's what we did. We opened the kimono and we said, what are your assets? What are your risks? What are the markets you're trying to serve? And it's been a really interesting exercise, including this initiative, the Slow Living Summit. I encourage you all to come to the breakout session where it's an extension of that discussion. It'll be very interesting. It's 2C, I think. 2C. So this concept of community wealth is very interesting. I invite you to come there, but I'll just say one final thing. We may not all be financial purists or economic animals, but we all are investors. And investors want more than just economic return, right? Even if you talk to any of those financial purists on Wall Street, they want something more. They want to beat the market. They want to do better than last year. They want to make more money than last year. They want safety and security. They want to stroke their ego. They want to feel good about where they put their assets to safe, productive, philanthropic uses. They want the rules to work for them. They want to do better than their competition. They all want to generate wealth. So you have to ask yourself, are the investments you're making today paying the dividends for tomorrow? Mark Twain said, I always plan for the future because that's kind of where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. It's interesting. So I'd encourage you to think about engagement, resilience, and this concept of wealth being so much more holistic, and this concept of investment, where you start looking around this audience and the people that you work with in 3 days, and you say, how can I leverage your assets to grow my markets, mitigate my risk, and achieve our individual and collective wealth objective? Thanks.
Amazing. And now he's going to take a few minutes with you to answer a few questions. We've got about 15 minutes. So you cool with that, Amit? Is that all right? Great. So anybody who has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. And we've got some wonderful handy-dandy microphone-holding humans like Geraldine who will come to you so that you may ask your questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things I'm concerned about is the way older people who are at or past retirement or moving towards retirement are kind of sold this idea that they need like a $1.5 million or something in the bank, and disregarding their assets or their capacity to build assets like relationships in their community. I just wonder if you have any ideas about how to change that conversation so we're not just talking about money in the bank, which can disappear at a moment's notice, as we well know, and how to develop, assets that will be really functional for people as they get older.
That's a great question. There's a financial services company that has a tremendous amount of money that you've very likely seen commercials of, and man, it just rakes me every time I see it, but the commercial is a bunch of folks walking around with a number underneath there. That commercial drives me absolutely batty, because managing to a number is the most insane concept ever, because that number has been assigned, right? And so when I think about my own personal lifestyle or those of clients, and I don't deal in a retail sense, I just institutionally, I always think about assets in a much more holistic way, right? So it may reap higher returns for a family to put some money into their greenhouse than it would be to buy a treasury bond. And I mean that holistically. The interesting thing about finance and markets, capital management, is that 9 out of 10 investors will talk about these, things that really have low probabilities, right? Big market crashes, although when they come, they hurt, they sting, right? The shark attacks of the world, that kills only, 10 people a year. But the general cholesterol of investing is tax planning, is month-to-month budgeting, is not paying high fees, it's managing how you look at gasoline, it's working with your utility on a year-long forward pricing model versus dealing with the market because natural gas goes high and goes low because OPEC decides to increase or decrease supply, right? And importantly, a lot of folks look externally outside their community on where they might be able to leverage those real core assets. There are a whole host of folks inside our community that I'm constantly searching for to want to provide economics to purchase stuff that I can't otherwise make. We don't raise beef, so I want to go to a local organic farmer, because if that local organic farmer remains operational, like the Franklin Farm, I know I can get very good product for a long time. So I think about assets in that way. And so these are the kinds of tools I think about. I would expand that definition of how do I understand my economic need, and instead say, how do I understand my lifestyle need? And then where are those pieces that deliver on that lifestyle? And I guarantee you'll find more and more and more and more tools that are wholly non-economic. Yeah.
I think he called her.
Oh, sorry. Go next.
Hey, thanks for your talk. It was really interesting. I think there's a lot to be learned from all the experiences you had to share. That said, I'm a little bit concerned about the idea that that it sounds like you're putting forward, tell me if I'm wrong, that we might want to shift our understanding of all human relationships into a marketized framework. That seems potentially really damaging to the possibilities for making the world a better place to me. So how do you reconcile the problematics of the ways that marketizing all relationships can raise for us with the need to recognize that we do currently live in a marketized system, that we might want to shift the language around a little?
Sure. I start with this language because it speaks to financial purists, right? So I take your point entirely. The issue I have is I just don't have a problem with vocabulary. It's just a word. A market's a market. And you can either bring a bias to that, and trust me, words have been skewed. Leverage is an evil word after 2008. Leverage is just leverage. Advertising was a terrible word for so long because, oh my gosh, it drove consumerism. Advertising is just a tool. Just what people do. A marketplace is a marketplace. It's where humans interact. So I very much understand and take that point. I just don't subscribe to the biases of a word just for the sake of the word. And that's the reason why I deliberately use words like wealth. I mean, wealth itself has been vilified. Financial wealth certainly has been vilified. And, well, we're all seeking wealth. I'm certainly seeking wealth. I'm just not going to define what wealth is for anyone else. And if someone says wealth to them is really accumulating a lot of economic assets, Godspeed. That's what you want. I think wealth is a whole slew of things beyond that bank account, too. And I see the marketplace in the same way. Everything is a marketplace. It's an interaction. Call it a community. Call it society. So I'm deliberately trying to use words that will speak to the masses. The other piece of this too is, some of the projects that we're working on now are how do we leverage the power and size of the capital markets, the institutional capital markets, to go to places of our most pressing challenges, global poverty, et cetera. And the capital markets aren't going away. Banks aren't going away, right? So we go to those markets and see if we can't leverage those markets in meaningful ways for us. Philosophically, I 100% agree, and my only explanation is it's just a word. M-A-R-K-E-T. There's an M and an A in my name, so is a T. Just a word. Yes?
Thank you, Amit, and thank you for the introduction, Linda. That was very fun. Quick question. Speaking of words, maybe you could help me how about leverage the word intangible? So when I'm working with private equity firms and I'm working with buy-sell kind of conversations with middle market companies that are trying to figure out their transition, there's this constant the vocabulary of intangible and the intangible of people, and that's often used against business owners who are trying to figure out non-financial metrics that will create real reason for them to do a deal that's not just about the money.
Right. And this gets back a little bit to this question because you have to speak to your audience, right? And sometimes that audience only speaks in financial economically denominated terms, right? Only in the quantifiable. Was it Albert Einstein who said not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted really counts? Right? So metrics are very good, but metrics fall short. Metrics can be subjective. I mean, look at the S&P, Fitch, and Moody's, right? We rely on these ratings, and many of them have been subjective. The proliferation of the sort of environmental social governance ratings, IRIS, GEARS, it's notable and very welcome. The risk is that either it's overly complex and does not speak to that institutional community, or they're trying to quantify things that may not be quantifiable. I'd go back to the root of what's the return objective. If you ask a philanthropist, many people will assume that philanthropists don't expect return. It's BS. Philanthropists expect an above market return. They've just defined return completely differently. So that's why I start there. I had a very, very interesting conversation about a company that wanted to get into social responsible investing. How about social responsible lifestyle planning? Right? Because if you're going to screen your stocks for all oil stocks, well, stop pumping gas. Stop buying duct tape. Right? Because those are fossil fuel generated. Right? So let's think about returns first, much broader, and then companies alike, institutions alike, individuals alike, and communities alike, and then start thinking about, okay, this is my return objective. And it'll take a lot of time, but I just went to simply go to the common denominator of economics or monetization, I believe misses the point, because some things are just not quantifiable in economic terms, because it's still an assigned price. I don't know how much time we have here, but yeah. Apologies, I just realized.
What you were talking about, the concept of price and the concept of value and how they're different. I was doing some research. My kids are thinking of coming to visit me from California, so I was going around looking at hotel reservations and how much it costs. And I won't name the hotel, but there was one that had rooms for $80, and the person behind the desk was looking and says, well, this is odd. I don't know why, but this particular week, those same rooms are going to be $120, which is like 150% of what they otherwise were. Then she said, oh, it's the week of the Soul Living Summit in the Strolling. And the value of the bed and the room and everything, to me, I guess would look the same, but the price is different because of what we're doing here. And it bothered me. I just noticed it and I thought, well, that's really odd. Is that, I guess you'd call that leverage? Is that what that is?
No, I call that opportunity cost. Right?
And let me interrupt you for a second, Amit, because I lied to you. My pants are on fire. You have 15 minutes.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so talk. Yeah.
Oh, well. Yeah, it's opportunity cost, right? I mean, you're going to get the largest price value for what the marketplace will give you, right? You know, Amtrak does this too, you know. It's wonderful, this sort of pricing model where if it gets closer and closer to a time, what's the value to you to going to DC? Well, if you really need to get there, you may be willing to pay the higher price. If there's an event in town, I'm going to charge a bit more, right? And so all things being equal is not always the case. All things are never equal. So the environment, the context, the ability to extract, the ability to provide a discount, one person's premium is another person's discount. It's the reason why stocks and bonds get sold every day in the capital markets. Half the people think they're getting screwed. The other half the people think that they're getting value, right? You know, so it's an interesting... And the best position is when people in that marketplace believe that they are both getting a good deal, right? That's the third space we're trying to get to, right? But that means that our return objective is the same. So if I sell you something for $5, I may think, oh man, I offloaded it. It's just a burden to me. You may think, wow, I got a great deal, right? But that goes with any good, any service. Yes. Yes. Next. See, I have a short memory.
Right here?
Okay, we'll go in reverse here. We'll go.
Who was it back there?
Yeah, right.
You spoke a little bit about
bringing together a day for athletics for young people and bringing together chefs and then use that to create new methods of value. That seemed to be a very tangible expression of some of the concepts you were talking about. So that was very interesting. Could you speak about, what was that group, and talk about that a little more? I think that puts some flesh on the bones of what you're speaking about.
Sure. It's an organization that was called Share Our Strength. Share Our Strength, yeah. I think don't quote me on that because I think the name may have changed, or they're rebranding to No Child Hungry, I think, because they're doing a big thing on child hunger. But a guy named Bill Shore and his sister Debbie Shore. Bill Shore was the campaign manager for the Gary Hart campaign a long while ago. So he's a Washington lawyer by training, and he just really wanted to solve this issue of poverty and said, how can we do this creatively? And started really talking to all these chefs and restaurateurs around the country, and just to put events together. It started that way, just to put events together. And where they asked chefs and restaurateurs to donate their time and then provide these wares to a host of people would pay a ticket, and then they would have to take some of those administrative costs and pay for them. But they realized in doing that the assembly of that group became an asset to them that they could leverage, because a number of companies in the food community said, well, wow, why don't you just, if you use Williams-Sonoma products, then you've got the Bobby Flays and the Wolfgang Pucks using these products. That was great value to those companies, and those companies would then provide capital to support that particular event, where then 100% of the proceeds of every ticket sold could go to hunger and poverty campaigns. Well, I'll show you two ways that they continued to grow, right? One is in this space where they said, let's assemble a brand new asset, and that's the example I gave around sports, right? Similar concept, for young kids who want to kick a soccer ball with Freddie Adu at DC United, or shoot a basketball with the point guard at Georgetown. A nice half day, and they got this amazing day. And so this asset, which was the assembly of athletic kids with professional and university sports professionals, if you will, was a tremendous asset to a number of companies that wanted access to that. And they did the exact same thing. Here's a third way they leveraged it. They understood that they could consult other nonprofits on doing just this. So they created a for-profit consulting arm called Community Wealth Ventures. And they consulted a number of entities, and for a fee, they were able to then help other organizations understand their asset base or the assembly of an asset, market it, and go to the marketplace and be able to sort of achieve their strategic mission. It was a wonderful education for me and some pretty amazing folks that ran that program and continue to grow it. And it's thriving all around the country, and then they're doing some stuff overseas as well.
So we have some questions over here.
Yeah, I want to just make sure I get this gentleman too.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Excellent. And thank you also for the artists.
Yeah, exactly. Amy, can you stand up, please? Please stand up.
Great.
Please turn around.
I really, really love the art and the way you wove them together. It's beautiful. Now, with regard to the question I wish to pose, we talk about ethical investment, and we talk about longer-term planning, and maybe even for our children's children, etc. And on the other extreme is this ultra-high frequency buying and selling.
Yeah.
Can you unfold that a little bit? Because it seems to me total antithesis to ethical principles and ethical investment. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a pretty complex question that I'd really like Amy to answer. I'll say this, and if you haven't read Michael Lewis's book, Flash Boys, I highly recommend it. It's a Michael Lewis, Flash Boys, really a fantastic look at high-frequency trading. In fact, it was just today that the SEC chairman came out with guidance on high-frequency trading because they're looking at this. Look, the beauty of human nature and the real curse of human nature is to be innovative, right? And high-frequency trading is just that. When I was at Mitsubishi, I would tell folks, we're always looking for where's the opportunity. We had two fellows that saw that the trades in the pit of the New York Stock Exchange were in fractions of a second faster than where they got them up in the box. So if you can imagine, if you get the trade at that point and you put hundreds of thousands of trades against that price, you can arbitrage that price to that price, make a pretty hefty amount of money. So there's a lot of innovation that, quite frankly, is needed, right? Because innovation stimulates, right? Many times that innovation goes in ways that can be really destructive. And unfortunately, it's the plight of humans to think about the repercussions too often much later. And high-frequency trading is just that. It's the regulations are catching up with some of these innovations in not unlike the exact same ways that they caught up with the number of and not necessarily all caught up with the number of financial derivative product, because that's just innovation too, right? Creating ways to create capital, economic capital, and not all that capital has any discernible value, right? So we argue, and this the basis, quite frankly, of slow living, of slow money, of slow, is the churn, the pace at which capital is being created does not directly translate to the value that we're getting at all. In fact, it's so imbalanced. And I would say that a holistic, realistic investment strategy has to reconnect the returns objectives with the most direct lines for where that value is created. And that's how I think about this stuff, right? Please.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. You were talking earlier about something that just makes you crazy, and one of the things that gets me there, although admittedly it's a short trip, is what I refer to as the money mafia, or Visa, MasterCard, and other such big conglomerates. If you tried to raise the sales tax in Vermont by 1 point, which would be from 6% to 7%, you'd have a political battle on your hands like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
But we freely and handily pay 3 or 4% at the register to the money mafia in the form of fees that they charge to merchants to have that banner that says we accept Visa. And then on top of that, they charge us interest of obscene amounts if we run a balance. You know the drill.
Yeah.
And one of the ways I think we can combat that is state bank. And I would just invite you to comment on that. Would it help? Would it not? What are the pros and cons? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. I have studied a bunch on sort of recent efforts in the state of Vermont to look at a state bank, and I believe there are a number of pros and there are some cons. A lot of the cons that I think of have to do with process and not the concept, because I do believe that the concept is incredibly sound. The issue really is, can we start moving in the direction of creating capital, leveraging that capital, and deploying that capital closer to home? That's the great concept of a state bank, right? Because so often we create that capital, we borrow and or lend that capital or deploy it in places not in Vermont. And so that we are subject to the risk and uncertainty outside that marketplace. Now, on the one hand, diversifying the risk is good, because you don't want to have concentration risk in the state of Vermont, right? Because if something happens in the state of Vermont, like a hurricane, how are there hurricanes in the Green Mountain State? Climate change, right? You want to start diversifying that risk. So there are real pros to at least having pieces of that portfolio outside the state. The issue then is, how can we divvy up and slice the pie such that the incentive structure and the diversification within the state is wide enough so that it dissipates the risk or it mitigates the risk? So for me, it's process. It's how do we start deploying more locally with the incentive structure to get paid back locally to enough sectors where you can diversify the risk. And a lot of folks will, on the pros and cons side, interestingly, will use examples like North Dakota, right in the state bank. A state that heavily relies on the mining space. So on the one hand, it's working, but a lot of times people forget how much of the capital deployment are in extractive industry. And then you get into the politics of fracking and pipeline laying and et cetera. So it's a much larger question than people are giving credit to, and I believe must incorporate the how. How do we get there as much as the concept? I don't know if that helps. Sure.
I can speak it if you want to say it. Take your time.
You mentioned that we are all investors, that we all want returns better than the market, better than last year, better than our competition. Over the past 10 years, there has been a large number of instances in which people put a lot of energy in making things look better than they were. And in your transaction model, there are other people on the other side who want things, they want to believe that things are better than they are. So you put those together and it makes Enron's, Bernie Madoff's, General Motors, Veterans Administration, et cetera. Could you comment on that?
Well, if I understand your question, you're making the point, right? I think if we start reconstructing where we individually and collectively perceive value and have it start from the social contract, we will start making different decisions as individuals, as communities, and as companies. That's not to say that manipulation doesn't happen, right? There are plenty of folks that just look the other way. And there are plenty of folks that call something good that just ain't good. There are a lot of folks that capitalize, for example, on the growth of the impact investment community. And a lot of institutions that raise impact funds to capitalize on a broader market that if you really investigate those portfolios aren't really impact. So I think you're always going to find innovation for the good and innovation that's fraudulent or to manipulate, to take advantage of. And you're always going to find the pace of innovation faster than regulation can keep up. So that compels us all to self-police a bit and drive resources in a manner that is reinforcing of that social contract, because that investment, I believe, pays dividends in ways that are much larger over time, I think, than the manipulation itself. So this is where there needs to be a relationship between the individual and community, and there needs to be a relationship between governments, private sector, and development in a way that I think can be symbiotic. Because what you point out is, it's all there. And but one thing I try not to do is that, it was like my comment earlier, the power of the capital markets is only growing. So to walk away from it or do things that shirk it is a mistake. It's just too large. How do we co-opt it to drive resources in places we can assign greater value that's reflective of our social contract? And that's true individual and community wealth creation. Anyway, thank you.
How about that? Amit Sharma. What a mind. And Amy Johnquest, what a vision. Thank you both. Both. Really beautiful work. So before you all wander on to your next adventures, and I know your lives are filled with them, I first have to thank my State Bank pink-shirted man, whose name I don't know, who pointed out a problem in your scheduling. So I have another announcement. That other announcement is from 4:30 to 6. All of you who would like to go to a related event, think about that. A presentation of Project Atlantic. It will be in the Graduate Lounge. It will not be in 2E, Graduate Lounge. And then a couple other little things. There were so many of you who wanted a copy of that boat anchor of a book by your friend Charles Eisenstein called The Ascent of Humanity. And we were out of them. God love you. I don't even know how you can carry such a thing out of here, but you will be able to carry such an object out of here. We found a whole other box of them. So you're all set. So go get your Ascent of Humanity. And for whoever the human is who set aside his or her big purple bag filled with a computer, you will be missing it if you're not missing it now, and it will be there for you at the registration desk. Have a great afternoon, everybody. This was wonderful. Thanks. Oh, and before I let you go, so don't move a muscle, stay right where you are because somebody very special is coming up to speak. And okay, I'm inviting you to the, oh, right, another pitch for Amy. You know what, you're going to hear me do this again. I'm doing it one more time. Amy Johnquest is this incredible artist who you've now experienced. And now you want her work more than you did before when I told you wanted it. And there is going to be a reception at the River Garden at 5 p.m. And you are all invited. You'll love to be received. And then you can check out the art. And then you can purchase the art. And you can also, and then at 7 o'clock, there is a reception at the Works, you know, the place where you can get your fabulous bagel. And you can go have some food, and then you can go have some food. So 5 o'clock at River Garden and 7 o'clock at the Works. And don't forget your new friend, Amy Johnquest. And thank you again to Amit Sharma. And by the way, oh, it's half gone? Oh, well, you're a little late. Get to work. Half of Amy's work is gone. All right, get out there. All right, thank you, and have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.